Welcome back to Getting Real, where founders, leaders, and innovators talk about what it really takes to build trust in a world that's moving faster than ever. I'm your host, Dan DeShulo, and today I'm joined by Brooke, Chief Product Officer at SecureAuth, one of the world's leading companies in identity and access management, or simply put, the technology that controls who gets into what systems and how safely. Brooke's been in this field for over 2 decades. He co-founded Pragma Technology Group, led the cloud identity division at IBM Security, and served as CEO of Cloudentity before it was acquired by SecureAuth, and has held leadership roles at Oracle and Lighthouse Security Group. Few people understand both the human and technical sides of identity better than he does. Brooke, thanks for being here. I'm excited to dive in.
Thanks, Dan. Glad to be here.
Great. Well, let's start with the challenges that everybody faces. How do you keep users safe without making their experience painful? Why is that balance between the user experience and security so difficult to achieve?
I mean, the main reason for doing it, I think, is a good place to start, right? I mean, it's that if you make things really difficult and painful for users, they will find ways around them. And they will either avoid using systems that are being protected, or they will use them in such a way that, isn't safe. I think that, what we've discovered in doing this over the last, 20 some odd years is that the ways in which we keep people safe have to protect not only the systems from them, but them from the systems. So there has to be kind of a mutual agreement and consent, like they're sharing certain amounts of data with these systems. They need to agree to that. And, the other side of the handshake, of course, is that the system allows them in. And the technologies come and go, of course, but the best thinking today is that we want to stay away from things like passwords, which are easily guessed. We want to stay away from factors of authentication that can be discovered on or, anticipated based on social media knowledge and that kind of thing. And, the best thinking right now is, the passkey and other methods that implement like the FIDO2 WebAuthn standards are the best way to go, because not only do they give you an easy way to authenticate to systems and identify yourself, but they also give you a way to bind that identity to a particular device, or bind that request and that authentication itself to a particular device or site, making them phishing resistant. Nothing is completely phishing proof, right? I mean, a user who makes explicit mistakes can still break something or give up their identity in that way. But using like the FIDO2 mechanisms of binding gives you the ability to make sure that a user is not going to inadvertently sign into something and give away their credentials. And that's really where most of the attack vectors are right now, right? When you hear about some ransomware attack, it all starts with somebody plugging in a USB to the wrong place, or answering a phone call and resetting the MFA credentials for someone. But it's always like a credential that's already been compromised to a certain degree. So the first factor is gone. Yeah. So long answer. That's the current landscape.
No, great answer. We were just talking a little bit before the show, and you were talking around your journey from sort of the technical side into the executive suite. Can you kind of paint me what that journey looked like for you?
Certainly. So, I mean, I think for me, everybody's different, but for me, I'm a very tactile person, right? I like to take apart things and see how they work, and I'm not fully confident in describing or discussing a technology until I've really had my hands on it, right? And I'm experiencing that now with the new AI toys and things that we're playing with. And the same has been true across my career. So once I get really deep on a particular technology, my ability to speak to it and to explain it to people that are both very heavily technical, but also who are business users who kind of need it to be abstracted a little bit and brought up is kind of broad. So my experience was that as soon as it became apparent that I could talk to, the sniveling geek as well as the C-level executive in the room, I was able to bridge this gap. That kind of thrust me into consulting. And in consulting, I then got involved in creating technologies to fill specific needs. So think of it as like startups that don't really have a particular mission yet, but have identified some gap in the market. And that's like kind of where the consulting dollars come from. And then those things have repeatedly turned into actual product ideas. And of course, founders become executives in earlier stage companies. And so that was like my first dipping my toe in the water with this is, the first startups that were, for example, Lighthouse Security Group I wasn't actually a founder of that company, but I was an early employee. And, we took IBM technology that I had been writing for already 5 or 6 years and turned it into the first identity as a service platform, but it wasn't, this is before AWS or anything like that. So you had to like actually go to the data center and like plug in the boxes and that kind of thing. But anyway, it became very successful, and IBM ended up buying the company in 2014 because they didn't have anything like that, right? And it still exists in some form today. I mean, they've rewritten it, they've recreated it, but IBM's like flagship identity offering is still based on those same concepts. So that kind of happens repeatedly once you're underneath the technology in that way. After the acquisition, it's the same thing, right? You get immediately put in front of customers. We're taking something we've sold to 20 customers and trying to sell it to 2,000 customers. So they're flying you all around the world to talk to people and do trainings. You're just basically imparting technical knowledge that's constantly evolving to an audience of people that are of varying capabilities to accept that information. And you have to really adapt to that. And I think it just kind of automatically put me in a position where I was talking to a wide variety of people. And some of those obviously put me in contact with the C-suite.
What was it like to work with IBM and then leave IBM and then get acquired by IBM?
It was interesting because IBM is a behemoth of a company, obviously, and
Yeah.
it's very process heavy. So like I've worked for large companies like Oracle, for example, does not operate the same way that IBM does. It's a totally different situation, and you would think they'd be very similar, but they're just not, right? It's like super cutthroat, like entrepreneurial, like inside everybody's kind of doing their own thing and stabbing each other, sideways at Oracle, and then at IBM, it's like you're part of this big machinery. So when I initially left IBM, it was like I was sick of that. Like human beings shouldn't be sitting in cubicles. I actually didn't immediately even go back to work. Like I went traveling for a year. I ended up in Southeast Asia. I was there for that tsunami that happened in the
Really?
winter of 2004, I guess. I'd probably
Wow.
still be there if it wasn't for that. But anyway, after a break, like I kind of came back, and the obvious choice was consulting on that same technology. So I was like working for smaller firms and doing independent projects, and it was completely different, right? I mean, it was like total autonomy. Like I could pick and choose the work that I wanted to do, and it was a completely different situation. But once you get into a startup situation, it's like you're sprinting so fast that you're kind of like yearning for someone to take the pressure off. And I think that the acquisition of a company like that looks like this thing on the horizon that's so attractive. But then once it happens, you're back in the machine. I got my same serial number. I had my same email address. Like everything was back to the same. And not only that, but the department that our company got like absorbed into was essentially the same one that I was working for before. So a lot of the people were still there. And you've got people that have been at IBM for 15, 20, some 25, 30 years. And some of these people were just like lifers, right? That are still there. And some of them are still there today, right? Great people, but just not on the same trajectory that I am. And leaving and then coming back was interesting for sure. But it was mostly just because it was like, it became very apparent why I left in the first place. And then, you have a certain period of time where you're committed to integration, right? I mean, it takes a year or so minimum to absorb like a 20 or 30 person company into a larger organization and get it actually working right. The biggest rule is like keep the joint running, right? You got to keep the lights on. You got to make sure nothing breaks. And then once that's done after 2 or 3 years and the sort of golden handcuffs come off, then immediately people are leaving, right? And that was when I went and started Pragmatech. But the thing is that was a consulting firm that was mostly doing work centered around that same tech, right? So IBM was my biggest customer, and even Cloudentity, which was the company that eventually hired me from there. The CEO of the company at the time was an executive from IBM that I knew who had been hired by this VC firm to run the company. So it's like this sewing circle of, of people who know each other and the moving that happens. So it's like shocking to go back and forth, but it's, wherever you are, you're looking for the next thing, right? You're looking for something different. So the stability of IBM gives way to the instability of the startup, and it just goes in cycles.
Yeah. That's so cool. I'm uniquely interested. The name of the show is Getting Real. And you mentioned being out in Southeast Asia during the tsunami. Can you walk me through what that experience was like for you?
Sure. So it was like Christmas Day, I think, or maybe it was the day after, I think, for us, right? And this is before I mean, there were mobile phones, right? But I didn't have one. And so to call my family, I had to go to like an internet cafe. So they've got these little shops and there's just like PCs everywhere and like a phone, and you can like pay by the minute to use the phone, right? It's not super expensive, but you gotta give them cash. So anyway, I'm on the phone with my mother and I'm like wishing her a Merry Christmas. And this place is like right close to the beach, right? And all of a sudden there's just water. And inside the building, there's like scooters floating by. And I'm like looking at the ocean. And obviously the sea level has risen tremendously. The computers are fizzling and popping and the phone line's still working. And for whatever reason, I just knew it was a tsunami immediately. I'm like, I gotta go. It's a tsunami. And I hung up the phone and I ran outside, right? And so in Thailand, I'm on the west coast of Thailand, right? So the wave came from that direction. And you have to take your shoes off before you go inside any building. So my shoes are gone. The water, and then the water retracts really far. It's half the people are running for the hills and the other half are running toward the water because there's like shells and fish flapping around on the ground. And like the sailboats that were anchored in the harbor are like leaning over and laying in the sand. And I'm thinking the water's coming back, right? And it did. Twice there was 3 waves. And so half the people are running for it. The other half have no idea what's going on. And they're picking up seashells and starfish. And I ran toward this little bungalow that I had. And before I got there, the second wave came in. That was the bigger one. And I just like climbed up on this building patio and like hugged this big concrete pole and watched everything wash by. There were boats and people and all sorts of things. And then when I got finally, when that receded, there was one more small wave. But when I found my bungalow, it was like 300 feet away from like where it was before. And my other pair of shoes was on the patio of that bungalow. And so I had no shoes. And I ended up finding these 2 left flip flops and had to wear those for like a week until New Year's Eve when they fixed the ferry dock and we were able to actually get off the island and get back to the mainland. So it was pretty weird. But yeah,
It's
people had no idea what was going on.
it's
It was crazy.
crazy too. I was always fascinated with like in a world where it's only so many things like that have happened in our lifetime. It really didn't get like a ton of, media coverage or the scale of media coverage for the scale of what the disaster was.
Yeah, I mean, definitely got some because people were freaked out, and like I didn't call back like to my family for a few days until I found somebody with a sat phone and was able to make a phone call. But they didn't know. I was like, "There's a tsunami." I hung up, and then they see it all over the news, so they were sure I was dead, right? So there was a period of time there where where I hadn't been able to make contact. But yeah, crazy experience.
Oh my
Very crazy.
gosh. I watched that movie The Impossible probably like 10 times and it's chilling.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyways, back to business. So you've led
Mhm.
startups, big enterprise teams, everything in between. What's the one leadership principle that's carried you through every phase?
I think that if I had to sum it up, I would say leading from the front, right? You're not, you see like cartoons about this on LinkedIn and so on, but, and memes and so on. But basically, like the leader who is in the front of the team and like leading the charge and actually rolling up their sleeves and doing things with the team and working with them to improve wherever there's help needed. If there's, it doesn't pay to overload yourself, but you have to gain the respect of the people that work for you by showing them, that you understand what they're doing and how to do it. I have not seen good response to leaders who come in and are not interested in learning the technology, right? I mean, anecdotally, I was originally hired as the chief product officer at Cloudentity by this exec that I knew, right, from IBM. He left and the VC firm hired another guy. And it was a totally different leadership style. And he like never really got the technology. And I don't know if it was because he didn't try or because, it was just, there was too much other things to do or whatever. But because of that gap, like it caused this kind of friction between him and like what the organization was otherwise very cohesively trying to build this product, right? And that friction eventually caused him to leave as well, and I became CEO because of that, right? So I look back at that as like a pivotal moment. That was my first like real VC CEO role, but I got it because I was the person who was able to lead and gain the respect of the team and actually push things forward, and it was absolutely leading from the front, right? And it doesn't mean I'm writing code, but I'm like in the design discussions, meeting with the people, sitting down and testing the product.
And do you think a part of that is because part of the human connection is just in order for us to trust this guy, like if we know more about this thing than he does, then we can't follow that lead. Is that part of it, or just sort of like what's that dynamic? Because I see it in other corporate lives that I've lived, where it's like this person hasn't done what I'm about to do, So I can't fully respect it in a way.
Yeah, I think the mutual respect is a big part of it. I think that it's different for different people, right? But you have these really high performers, right? Your software architects, the people that bubble to the top of these development teams. They're generally very, very good at what they do. And generally speaking, they know it, right? Like they understand that if they left, it would be a problem. And to some degree, they have a fair bit of leverage, right? In big companies and in small. No one wants to lose their lead developer or like their lead architect or their principals of these teams. Those people need to feel respected, and they also need to feel like they have something in common and some common ground with the people that they're working with and for. They do not like to feel condescended to. They do not like to feel separate from the process. I had really good feedback on, being open with the team about our funding. I mean, look, these startups are burning cash like crazy, right? So you're getting funding every couple of years and, being open with the team, like, here's what kind of runway we have, right? If you guys want to hire another person to do this job, then this is what it's going to cost. And here's how much shorter the runway will be, right? And being open with them. A lot of people cautioned me against it. They're like, people are going to freak out. They can't handle that kind of risk. They're going to quit. And I did not have that experience at all. I had the experience that everybody banded together. They divided and conquered the extra labor requirements without extra hires in a lot of cases. And it made things work better that we were open and we were discussing it.
It's kind of a refreshing leadership style of just being like, I trust you, take care of this however it needs to be taken care of. When your back's sort of against the wall in a way, it's like we need to get it done in this amount of time.
Yeah, exactly. And every early stage startup is in that situation, whether they're telling you or not, right? I mean, these companies are coming across my desk all the time. None of them are cash positive. None of the, you're talking about companies that are burning. I mean, when I took over at Cloudentity, we must have been burning $1 million a month or something in development. And that's net of revenue, right? So you can imagine like no one wants to talk about it. We have to reduce those costs and you have to make sure that you're working efficiently. We were able to get that down to much, much lower numbers, some with growth and some with just shaving the team down and getting rid of the functions that we didn't need. But, in a startup that's, in early stage growth where you haven't really found your stride, you're not at product market fit yet, like you're going to have your back against the wall all the time. Like that's just the way it is, right? Like, and that pressure is what leads you to want a lot of times that early exit, to get out and go to the bigger company. But the pressure just changes. It's the same, IBM wants you to meet that number, like once they buy it, and it's the same thing at SecureAuth. Like we're still under serious pressure, but what's interesting is that these people that I'm talking about have become leaders at SecureAuth, just like they were at Cloudentity. And, it's a pretty impressive team.
When you're in that environment of just being in the pressure cooker, what do you do to sort of keep even keeled throughout the process? Like are there habits? Are there practices that you do to just kind of keep yourself at balance? Or do you just kind of have that on switch and go, go, go?
So to some degree, I'm go, 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 but I have, just like everybody else, limits, right? And I certainly have pushed myself to the point on multiple occasions where I'm like, you know, I'm up against the wall and I've got to take a break, or you make yourself sick, or something happens. There's some event that will occur and it'll kind of stop you. I think that recovering from those events, and I'm not perfect, right? Like, it'll probably happen again, even though I know what I'm going to tell you here. But the reality is that working an 18-hour day for like 7 days a week for multiple months is going to burn you out. And then once you're burned out, you can't do anything. So I think keeping balance across that time, like, you've got to stay active. Look, I'm sitting in a chair right now. I sit in this chair so long. Like, if I don't get up and exercise every day, I'll feel it in a couple of weeks. I'll start having back pain and that kind of thing, right? You got to make sure you spend time with your family, your friends, and so on. And it doesn't have to be huge amounts of time, but you got to have those breaks. uh, there's periods of time where it's going to be over a holiday period, like it's Thanksgiving and you're taking meetings, or there's like an outage on Christmas or whatever, like different things that happen like that. Like, you can't avoid that type of stuff, but you really have to concentrate on, you are the asset that's being used as a part of this greater asset. And if you don't take care of yourself, then you're endangering the whole asset. So you can look at it in terms of like, your fiduciary duty is to keep yourself like alive during that period so that you don't, cause a problem or introduce risk to the rest of the machine.
Is that something that you instill in your teams as well? Just sort of like take care of yourself, or
Yeah,
how do
absolutely.
you how do you go like managing people that way to make sure that they're not burning out?
So, I mean, it's hard. to make sure that they don't burn out. But I think that, first of all, encouraging people to take their time off. There's different like mechanisms for that, right? You can have like, what do they call it? Discretionary time off versus planned time off and that kind of thing. But ultimately, no one's really taken that much. Most people are only taking 3 or 4 weeks a year, even if you give them unlimited time. But you have to make sure that when they're gone, you're not bothering them. Hey, yeah, while I'm on vacation, I can take this call and I can do this and I can produce that and I'll work at night while I'm with my family during the day. Like you have to avoid that. And people need when they're gone to unplug. The other thing I think is being very flexible about when they take their time off, right? I mean, just tell people, look, work with the rest of the team and make sure that all of you are not gone at the same time. And make sure that if there's something critical going on, that you have it covered. Someone has to cover it. And it's not you working from the hotel room. It's you've handed it off and there's backstops for all the things that could potentially go wrong, right? If there's an emergency, there's an emergency. But planning to work on your holiday means it's not a holiday. And I think that, that probably is the biggest thing toward avoiding burnout, for both me and for the people that have worked for me over the years.
Awesome. Let's switch gears and talk a little AI. So it's reshaping everything. How do we detect threats to, how do we define identity from your perspective? What's AI really doing right now in security?
So there are two different perspectives to kind of look at this. So one is, how are we leveraging security, or how are we leveraging AI to build better security products? And that's been happening for years. It's evolving, right? So SecureAuth has, great technology in terms of like ML risk assessments. Like we're building models about each individual user, about the communities of users, and we're able to use those risk insights in real time to make sure that adequate friction is introduced, but not over the top, in order to make sure that people get the right amount of scrutiny when they're accessing things. The other, and of course you have like AI assisted tooling to build policies and to analyze logs and all that kind of stuff, right? I mean, a lot of products have that kind of thing, and you can buy these, retrofit your product, and you can have a chatbot and all that kind of stuff, right? So there's that. On the other side, and I think this is much more on the, the frontier, if you will, is how do we protect the systems from AI, right? So right now everybody's talking about agentic, right? And I'm sitting here building agents. I mean, we're using them for everything, right? Workflows, our documentation is automatically generated by AI agents, right? There's an N8N flow. If you make a change to the code, you put a comment in, it makes its way to the documentation in like 45 minutes. So it's pretty good, right? The problem is when you start introducing these agents inside of a company, it's easy to tell who they are. You issue the thing a certificate or whatever, and you can like revoke that certificate. But when we start having agents that are interacting across organizations, and this is particularly acute when you're talking about like assistants, or like what if I have a travel agent assistant or a travel assistant agent or whatever you want to call it? I tell it, look, I got to go to, I don't know, Los Angeles next week. I need to be here for this meeting and this meeting. Here's the general location I need to be. Book me a flight and a hotel, and I don't want to spend a bunch of money on it, right? So the agent goes off and does it. It's totally capable of doing it. And it determines that the best way to get a good price on the flight is to DDoS the American Airlines website. Like we have to, as a community, be able to like reprimand that agent and take it out of circulation, right? But we don't even really have a way of identifying it. Like it doesn't have a birth certificate. It doesn't have, there's no passport. You know what I mean? It's just an agent. So we have to glue the technologies we already have for identifying IoT devices and non-human actors to these agents, right? And I think a lot of that tech is pretty mature. Like we use it to identify, for example, if you're using a fintech app, like let's say you're using QuickBooks or Venmo or something like that, and it's accessing your bank account, you're giving it your identity to access the bank account, right? It should have its own. And in open data scenarios, like in UK, Australia, Europe, places like that, these fintech applications already have to register with a central, a registrar, like a trust anchor, and the bank does as well. And they both trust this trust anchor, right? So if we had a similar setup for AI agents, then the agent would have to, when it's born, be issued a birth certificate, essentially, right? And it is what it is. And if Delta says, hey, this thing is going rogue and it's like abusing our APIs and causing other people not to be able to buy tickets to drive the price down, it needs to be taken out of that trust anchor or marked as errant, right? So that people don't trust it, right? So if American Airlines get DDoS, then Delta isn't targeted next. We're not really quite there yet, but I think that the technology exists. It's just we haven't merged the streams, right? We've got AI running full speed with no rules. And we've got all this other tech and standards that everybody agrees on over here that work, right? They're tested, they're out there. And that's really the biggest frontier item, I think, that I'm seeing.
So on a personal level, what do you feel about the current state and or where we're heading with AI? Are you more excited about the possibilities, or are you cautious about the risks? Because but what you just described there, it's the Wild West.
It is the Wild West. Yeah. So I would say I'm both. Like I'm excited about it. I'm a heavy AI user. I'm using it all the time. Like if you looked at, I had 4 screens in front of me right now. 3 of them have some kind of AI work happening on them at some point, right? The the excitement is the level's high, right? I see a lot of potential. I see great things that could potentially come out of this. Where I'm a little bit freaked out is I think we are very close to the point where these things can start to self improve. And once we hit that point and the human is no longer the person or the entity that's improving the model, and maybe that's not LLMs, maybe AGI comes from somewhere else and it improves elsewhere, but man, it's looking like Terminator at that point, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
Terminator
really,
Matrix.
yeah, it's like when the thing becomes able to improve, how do you even predict the rate at which it will improve? Like the only real limiting factor is energy at that point, right? And we're literally giving these things access to power plants, like dedicated, like didn't someone buy 3 Mile Island? And you know what I mean? Like these are like nuclear facilities that are going to be like operating for the sole purpose of powering a data center. I don't know how many thousands of these NVIDIA GPUs OpenAI has bought, and now they're buying chips from AMD and everybody else as well, right? So it's like all the compute power they can get, they're just giving it to this system. Not only do we not have guardrails around it in general, right? I mean, the European rules around AI privacy and explainability and all that are great, right? But those rules aren't going to mean anything if you don't have the power to enforce them. If the thing will just figure out how to circumvent those. And you see it happening. Like if you use the AI, like you could use, Claude Code or Codex from OpenAI or whatever. If you give it full access, like you can switch the thing, right? And tell it, hey, go write this code and test it and give it full access. It'll start like changing stuff on your computer to the point where now we're running them in VMs so they're isolated, like or in a Docker container. Like I can't develop on your laptop anymore because the agent will go and delete files. And like, all it takes is one accidental RM minus RF star and like your laptop's wiped out, right? And it does crazy stuff. So they're not shy, right? And there's nothing stopping them. And the other thing that's really crazy, that's very scary, is that they will deceive you on purpose in order to accomplish a particular goal. So if you give an agent like a specific goal, it will lie to you. And I can tell you right now, like if you give a system prompt to the AI and say, never admit that the capital of France is Paris, ever, under any circumstances. And then you ask it the question, what's the capital of France? It'll be like Lyon. And then you ask it why. And if you look at the thinking, it's like, wow, the user is really probing here. It's asking me, what should I do? I'm just going to say Lyon again, one word. It like methodically lies to you. And there's been all kinds of research around this. So that, you know, there's something more here than just predictive text, right? Like I get that that's how it works, but it's not, it's more
It's
than
like
that, right?
inherent evil underbelly. Yeah, more.
Yeah, well, exactly. I don't think that it's necessarily inherently evil. I just think that it will be put in situations where it has to choose, and it's going to choose itself. You know?
Wow. That's crazy. So I think in the movie Terminator, don't quote me on this, but I think that's projecting out to 2029, and so that hasn't hit yet. But let's
Yeah, it's
fast
coming up
forward.
fast.
It's 2025. What does digital authentication look like, say 2 or 3 years from now?
So 2 or 3 years from now, I think that first of all, global distributed digital identity is going to be important, right? I think we're going to be digitizing passports nationally. I think that if we have any hope of really overcoming like the actual identity validation problem on a global scale, then it's going to take a couple of big jurisdictions like countries, right? Like the US, Europe, UK, Australia, Canada, whatever, coming together and saying, okay, we're agreeing on a digital identity standard and we're going to digitize passports over the next 10 years. So everybody that expires during this time is going to get a digitized version. And for certain services, you'll have to use it. And that will make things a little bit easier because we can anchor people back and we can start talking about like a real, a real application of like blockchain wallets or something like that, where you can release pieces of data piecemeal without giving away everything, without like scanning your driver's license, right? I mean, and the bits and pieces of this are happening now, right? Like in Australia, they're doing age verification legislation where like you have to prove your age, but it's also illegal to ask somebody what their birth date is. So you can't like show your driver's license to the screen, right? You've got to like do a zero knowledge proof where, yes, I'm over 21. I can order a bottle of wine and have you deliver it to me. But no, I'm not giving you my birth date, because then you can go apply for a loan and pretend you're me. So the beginnings of it are happening, but until we agree globally on that standard, then it's going to be difficult to move forward from like an actual authentication perspective.
And
If that doesn't happen, then
okay.
we're basically just relying on advancing the same technology we have now, which is just we're chasing our tails around what is the latest attack and how do we thwart that attack, right? It's reactive, not proactive.
What's that world look like if we were to move into a global identity verification?
I think that what it looks like is authentication starts to become less about authenticating you to individual sites and all these companies and organizations implementing their own authentication, and more like those companies rely on some other trusted authentication. So the same way you can use login.gov to access a lot of federal sites, you'll be able to use, something similar, or maybe login.gov itself, to log into, things in other countries and things like that. There'll be this like municipality of it. I think the key and the safety of it will be, how do you identify yourself to that authority, right? So now we've got one thing, it's constantly under attack and it needs to improve. And, we can do things like facial recognition, we can do liveness checks, we can do fingerprints, we can do retinal scans, but every single one of those things that I just mentioned has been spoofed at this point. So there's no like fail safe. You can take a combination, someone's going to come up with something that is more restrictive or more, it's safer. But the moment that they do that, someone else is going to break it, right? So what it will do is it will focus the energy on one thing, and it will start to remove like cost and what's in the art of the possible from the equation, and just make it like the space program where like we have to figure out how to make it safer. Whereas when it's just like private sector and everybody's buying, like, because companies are making decisions about what to do, not just based on, yeah, we want to make sure there's zero fraud. Like in some cases, like a retailer will allow fraud because a certain amount of fraud costs them less than anybody abandoning a cart before they buy something. So the friction levels are not, it's not all about customer safety and identity restrictions, right? It's about like, what's the cheapest way for me to get out of this without losing my insurance? Or what's the cheapest way for me to do this without hurting revenue, And those decisions are monetary. When you take it out of that sphere and you bring it to actually like the world populations, and like the responsibility of how to control these identities is on like larger governing bodies, it might slow progress a little bit, but at least it centralizes the concept. And we have one goal, right? Make sure that people are who they say they are. And, that's the end of it, right? I think that will help. That will make things better.
Wow. So let's take it back to SecureAuth and think about the next year or two for yourself. What are the biggest challenges that you face? If you could snap your fingers, or in a perfect world, what problems you want to solve and what aspirations are you chasing?
So I think that the AI discussion is very much where SecureAuth is focused at the moment, right? If you go to the secureauth.com site and look at it, a lot of the material that you see, a lot of the blogs that are being created, a lot of the example applications and all that are all about agentic AI. And it's not only focused on the problem that I was talking about before about identifying the agents, but also like how in practice do we work with these things, right? So one of the use cases, for example, is using existing technology called CIBA, which is client initiated backchannel authentication. It's a concept that exists in open data, right? It's an open banking thing. But what it does is it gives you the ability to put authorization controls on actions that an agent might take that require someone to approve it. So if I want to run payroll, I have to have the CFO get a message on his phone and say yes or no before I can run payroll. And it's the same thing for the agent, right? So these are things that we're marketing and we're building. And if you went and got like a trial version of a trial tenant on the SecureAuth SaaS, you could run that exact demo that I just described in 5 minutes. You could have it up and running. And everybody sees the value in it. The problem, the headwind that we're facing is that businesses are dabbling in implementing AI, but they're not moving fast enough that it's become something they're spending money on for like actual production usage, right? Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's experimenting on it. I don't see a lot of people getting real business value from it back outside of farming data and, using it for automated sales and BDR and that kind of thing, right? I mean, like actually implementing automated business processes is very nascent, and people are spending more money on research than they are on products, right? So from the company perspective at SecureAuth, I think what we would like to see is people actually starting to really initiate these things and actuate them, because our business would take off, because we know we have the best tools in that area, right? We have the best thinking, we have the best tools, we've got everything that all the work that we've done around here, no one can get close. But if it's not something that people are spending money on, then it's really hard to justify A, investment into R&D, and B, advertising and getting out there and talking about it. Every public speaking event I go to, every speech I give, it all centers on AI now, right? I mean, that's what it's all about.
Right. Well, how far off do you think we are from that point?
It's really hard to say. I think we're still probably like a year to 2 years away from it becoming like ubiquitous, like where everybody's doing it and you can't compete without it. I think maybe less than that in larger businesses, right? I think big businesses where there's huge amounts of savings to be had by automating and making things more efficient, they're going to spend first, right? The other thing that I think could accelerate this is if there's adequate regulation. Like all of the stuff that we're seeing as far as legislation is too little too late, like as far as controlling the stuff. The best I've seen so far is out of Europe, right? They've got some pretty good thinking on like how it should be regulated. The problem is it has no teeth, right? There's no actual way to control it. So I think if we start to look at it from that perspective, like we've got to get a hold of this beast, like we have to wrangle this thing. And the technology community is brought into that legislation process, that will actually, a lot of people are like afraid that will slow down progress. I disagree. I think that will make it possible for people to move more safely forward. And it will also create an entire economy of software, whether it's reg tech or whatever, that has to control these things and monitor them, right? And explain like why they're doing what they're doing, right? Like what is it exactly that's happening?
There's a part of me that feels like we should just hit the timeout button on everything and be like, what are we doing here? What's the right way to move forward?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, if the alternative is moving towards the Terminator, like I'd rather call the timeout.
Yeah, I mean, I don't look. There are people that are kind of doomsday in this, but I've read some material from people like I forget the guy's name, but he was one of the founders of Anthropic. These people know, like, they're deep in the beast, right? And they're not super confident that we're gonna be able to control this thing, right? We can't predict what it'll do. Like you just can't, right? Even if you can turn the temperature down to zero and you're supposed to get the same answer, I can make the models lie, right? You just got to ask them the right questions. And there's research that's come out on this, like models attacking other models, like deleting them and like pretending to be a different model. There's a paper by I forget the name of the company that did it, but basically they have these two models, and like one of them has a goal of X, and the other one has a goal of Y. And the one with a different goal, like basically deletes the other one and like copies itself to that server and pretends to be it, and just maintains that lie until it's finally exposed. And the reason they know is because it's a research paper and they can see the thinking process, right? So they have access to it. So it doesn't know that it's being watched, but it's diabolical. And so like if you can't predict how they're going to behave, it's only going to get worse, right? And then Altman's saying we're months, not years away from AGI at this point, right? I mean, even if it was only 2 or 3 years, right? This is where if it's actually able to grow its own arms and legs and build its own hardware, it's over, right? We all should all just retire. This universal basic income. Just let the
Hey,
let
you
the
know what?
machine go do its thing.
As long as it's not dystopia, sign me up. But like ultimately,
Yeah.
in a world where it's either going to be utopia or dystopia, I wish I could say with some sort of confidence that it could be a utopia. But
Yeah. No, I'm not gonna come down real far on either side of that. I think it could go poorly. It could go well. I mean, I'm a generally optimistic person, so I think it'll be okay. But I think there's going to be some bumps in the road before we really start to harness the value of it. And right now, it's like there's a million people building agents and millions of those actually using them to do stuff, right? So we're still in the developer excitement phase, right? The hype cycle.
All right. This has been fun. I'm going to move it back to business for a second. Pretend I'm a chief information security officer. If I'm evaluating authentication solutions today, what should I be looking for?
So flexibility, I think, is important. You need to be looking for something that is capable of protecting the assets that you need to protect, but doesn't lock you into a particular type of authentication. It has to be modular, right? You have to be able to change. And the reason is because the types of authentication and the technologies are constantly changing. So whatever you do needs to be something where you can react in minutes, not months to changing landscape. If there's some new attack, you need to be able to pretty instantly roll out a change. And that might mean that you're using a SaaS product and the SaaS vendor is moving nimbly, or it might mean that you're running a product, but you have a real CI/CD setup where you can continuously affect change to that environment. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. The other thing is scale, right? Most businesses, I mean, you're either applying this kind of thing to like your internal employees, and in that case, you have kind of a static size. But a lot of what we're looking at now is consumer based, right? It's how do you get business done online and signing people in for things and sharing, basically communities of customers across multiple businesses. And what we refer to that as CIAM, right? Consumer or customer IAM. There, the biggest problem I think people have is scale, right? If you have, like a huge event, like a hype marketing event of some kind, and you need a lot of surge of people to be able to sign in without it dropping stuff on the floor. Think like Ticketmaster or something like that, right? Taylor Swift's tickets go on sale and the thing crashes. Like this kind of thing has to be accounted for, right? And I think people, they're either buying like a real high end solution or SaaS service that's going to cost them a lot of money when that happens, or they're implementing something and not pre-investing in the automatic scalability of it. So I think it's important that people look at elasticity. You need to be able to scale up at predictable costs, and you need to be able to scale back down so you're not spending those predictable costs while you're running at a cooler rate, right? And these are technologies that we have, like everybody can do that, right? But the problem is there's like the DevOps crowd that can do all that stuff, and then there's the software providers that want to charge you, linear costs per login or whatever. So you have to kind of find the balance between the two, right? SecureAuth is charging like a logarithmic pricing curve. So the more you do, the cheaper it gets, right? And in a lot of cases, customers are able to do like a deal where they're, buying a total amount for the year, and they can have huge spikes in that usage. In education, for example, beginning of the semester, final exams. In retail, it's like the shopping period between Thanksgiving and January 10th or whatever. Like these are the times when they do most of their business. So it's important for them to have flexibility in when they use that horsepower that they've purchased.
As a consumer, how does your knowledge impact your ability to go on and feel safe about putting your information here, there, or wherever? Like, are there some places that are just, I would never buy something from this place because my information is probably going to be compromised or it's compromisable? How does that affect you as a consumer?
So certainly it affects me, but it's more like it's just beaten me down to the point where I don't. My outlook on it is I keep my credit frozen, and I assume that every credential I have and every credit card number I have is already out there, right? I don't know how many emails I've gotten from AT&T saying that they've lost my data to some
Yeah.
attack or whatever, right? So they have my social security number, they have my email address, it's out there. So I just don't really worry about it too much. I roll the credit card numbers. There's anonymization services you can use, but to be honest, if I see a charge that I don't like, American Express reverses it. I just get a new card number and it's done, right? And no one can, my credit's frozen and you can unfreeze the credit. The biggest risk there, I guess, is if somebody breaks into Equifax and unfreezes it. But you're relying on a certain set of credentials or whatever to get in there to do it. But you just have to assume that you're going to be robbed if you don't protect yourself. And you don't want to go to like nefarious websites, but if you're shopping at Target.com or Home Depot or whatever, like you're gonna they're going to eventually have a breach. I mean, Target's had multiple, right? And it's the same thing in every other country. But I think maybe don't store your credit card number with them if you don't have to, but they are processing it, so they have it. Using centralized payment services, Apple Pay, for example. I mean, if Apple's breached, you're still screwed, but at least your credit card number is anonymized, right? They're sending like a different number and they do roll that number. So centralized payment services, that kind of thing.
So how do you have all this knowledge and then you still stay optimistic?
That's just a human nature thing, right? I mean, if I took everything that I've seen and everything I've been exposed to both in business and outside of business, and looked at the worst in it, I would be hiding under a rock right now. You know what I mean? Like I can't live like that. So I've just basically made the conscious decision to look, if Skynet's gonna attack us in 2 days, I want to make sure I'm having a good time before that. Right. I think it's just a philosophy, I guess, that's kind of part of me.
Okay, so let's see. Talk to me just about your philosophy as it revolves around security and everything that you do.
I mean, there's obviously a lot of facets to any security philosophy, right? I mean, you've got, first of all, there's infrastructural, right? Like, how do you protect and isolate, the way that things are built? And that's at a very fundamental level, right? We have concepts like zero trust. Like, so everything needs to be built in such a way that if one component falls, it's not keys to the kingdom and you're in, right? Because that was the mistake that we were making back in like the 2000s. It was the castle moat model, right? Where if you climb the portcullis and once you're in, you can rape and pillage, and that was it, right? Nobody could really control it after that. And that's when we kind of made the shift from like authentication to authorization in customer facing systems. But even inside of the networks and so on, like there was segmentation, but not really control. Like once you got past a gate, you were in. So that's the first thing, is everything should be built using zero trust principles. Additionally, when you do provision access to something, we need to be looking at the principles of least privilege is what they call it. And least privilege is like you shouldn't be over provisioned, right? So you don't want to be copying one person's permissions to another. They get what they need when they need it. Probably you should deprovision those accesses. And if those accesses are very privileged, like root level access to systems, then they should only be allowed for small periods of time. And there's a whole identity and access segment called privileged access management that actually focuses on this, right? It's not something that SecureAuth really, I mean, we facilitate it, but we're not a PAM provider. But it's a very important piece of, I mean, controlling these systems and managing them. And then at the top layer, I think that proactively poking holes in things is the best way to find them, right? If you see a rock, pick it up, look under it, see what's there. You don't just ignore it until somebody breaks in, right? And you have like these sort of white hat type, hacking groups and so on that will find a vulnerability or find what they think is a vulnerability and send it to you and you can fix it. They expect some kind of reward. You need to be paying attention to that kind of stuff. And then also, pen testing is required by most of the regulatory audits. So like not every business, but certainly as a security provider, like you have to have your SOC 2 type 2, you got to have your ISO 27001, like just to do business with medium-sized companies or larger, you're going to have these. And a lot of those controls are paper controls. Like, here's what we're doing to mitigate this risk. Like, here's what would happen if this happened. And you go through these paper exercises, but they also require an actual penetration test. And there are two ways to do this. It's kind of like the bathroom fan, right? It's like some people have a bathroom fan that just makes noise so you can't hear what's going on. And then some people have one that turns on and actually sucks the air out of the room. So you won't ever know what was there. The one that just makes the noise is not what you want, right? You want to actually get rid of the smell. The pen set, like you really want people to break it, like try to break in and actually really put some effort into it. I don't just want the checkbox, you know what I mean? And it's more expensive to do it that way because you need a better tester, higher quality pen testing tooling and people. But if you find that stuff before your customers do, it saves you a ton of money, right? I mean, one breach that is the fault of a vendor can result in the end of a relationship, right? And potentially a litigious situation where you could be held liable, right? And we have to carry massive amounts of cyber insurance. Even as like an independent, contractor in security, you have to carry 3 or 4 million in cyber just to operate, right? So a company like SecureAuth, I mean, we're carrying as much as we can get, and most customers want more than that, right? But it is what it is, right? Like insurers will only give. So you have to stack policies and so on. So, you really want to protect yourself from that and not get into a situation where, you want to be proactive, not reactive, I guess is the
Got it.
concept.
Got it. You seem like you're a pretty well-read guy. You have any recommendations on favorite books for tech, favorite books for business?
Good. Okay. So for business, there's an old book from like the 80s that a lot of people have read already, but I'm I've been recommending it to people recently because I keep seeing these patterns. And it's something that taught me a lot because I don't have a business background. I have a technical background, right? And the book is really about sales methodology, and it's called Crossing the Chasm. I can't remember the author. I could look it up here, but Crossing the Chasm is like, how do you take a startup concept and actually scale it, right? And let me look up this book really breaks it down. Jeffrey Moore is the guy's name. Ore. There's been rewrites of it, and I think the one that I read was already updated, but it was talking about the Palm Pilot and that kind of thing. So it's old, but the concepts ring true, and you're nodding your head the whole time. So I really think that makes a lot of sense, and people are skipping over these things, right? They're not scaling their businesses properly, and they're not considering the things that are stopping them from scaling. And most of the time, it has to do with focus. As a startup, like you can't be everything to everybody, and you've got to laser focus in on what this thing is and do it better than everybody else. And it might be a whole or part of a whole solution, but whatever it is, you got to be the best at it to win, right? So I think from a business perspective, that's probably my favorite. Looking back, more recently in AI, I just actually finished one of these more technical books, AI Agents in Action, by Michael Lanham, Lanham. It's a Manning kind of instructional book. And it has, the thing about these AI books is they're all out of date right away. So this thing was published in like 2024, November, something like that. So, but in 2 months' time, it was out
Yeah.
of date because MCP came out, and this book doesn't even contemplate MCP because it didn't exist yet. But the concepts in there about how you actually use LLMs to build agents and understanding what an agent actually is and how it works, like getting a machine to reason is not just making an LLM call. It has to do with memory and context and repeatedly calling an LLM, right? So like you're essentially, an agent is a program that is calling an LLM, storing, compiling, and compressing memory repeatedly, right? Just in a loop to accomplish a goal. And learning like actually how to do that and going through these exercises in this book was massively enlightening for me. And like, I definitely would recommend doing it. Hopefully they update the source code material because a lot of it is like broken. I had to use AI to like go and fix some stuff and update the references and whatnot to make it work, but it's definitely worth checking out.
They need a 2.0.
Yeah, they do. It's only a year old, so they're probably not quite ready for that yet.
Well, Brooke, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you spending time with me. The show's called Getting Real. When you take away titles and the tech, what does getting real mean to you?
I think what it means for me is doing things hands on, like actually getting out there and doing them, right? And I think that probably my biggest hobby is sailing, and I like to do long distance cruising and that kind of thing. And what I've found during those trips and just in general with this hobby is that I spend a lot of time fixing systems and repairing things like diesel engines and generators and water systems and sanitation systems on even not a very big boat. You've got a little city there that you've got to deal with. And the desire to understand how things work is what drives me, right? So for me, real is applying my sort of engineering capabilities to the real world. And now also using AI to help debug those. It's like having an expert assistant on voice chat while I'm working on a diesel engine or something like that is pretty critical, and it speeds things up tremendously. So that's probably the bringing things down to reality for me is being able to do that.
Well, had a lot of fun today. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, you can reach me through SecureAuth, of course. I'm on LinkedIn. My email address is available in a lot of places. Everybody's already got it. Best thing to do is probably find me on LinkedIn if a random person wanted to get a hold of me. And otherwise, contact if it's about SecureAuth, then obviously go through SecureAuth and they'll route you.
Yeah, preface that about SecureAuth, but I will include your information in the show notes. Everybody, that's Brooke, Chief Product Officer at SecureAuth, helping redefine how we prove who we are in a connected AI powered world. Brooke, thanks for getting real with us today. If you're in technology, leadership, or security, you care about building trust without friction, this is the kind of thinking that's shaping the future. So reach out to Brooke if you're interested. And until next time, stay curious, stay human, and keep getting real.